In today's show, Andy Patton of Locked On College Basketball joins the program, and we talk Trailblazers draft targets in the mid-lottery. Names you need to know as we get closer to the NBA draft. Welcome to Locked On Blazers. Let's get into it.
You are Locked On Trailblazers, your daily Portland Trailblazers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
What's up, world? It's your past first point guard and Trailblazers reporter, Mike Richmond. You're listening to another episode of Locked On Blazers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, available wherever you get podcasts and also on YouTube. Thanks for making this show your first listen, coming at you each and every weekday, Monday through Friday. So make it a part of your daily routine. Make it your first listen. Tell your friends to do the same. It's Locked On Blazers, your team every day. Today's episode, a very fun one. Friend of the program, friend of mine, and returning guest, Andy Patton, the host of Locked On College Basketball and Locked On Zags. What he's doing is he's writing and talking about college hoops pretty much all the time that he is awake. Andy, thanks so much for joining the show. How you doing?
I am good, Mike. Thanks for having me. Looking forward to continuing to talk college hoops, like you said.
Yeah, you've probably taken as many as 45 minutes off from writing and writing and talking about college hoops. I know how you get down. I know you are many places spread very thin, so we always appreciate the time. The Trailblazers right now have the 7th worst record in the league. They are anything is possible with Joe Cronin's commitment to losing after the All-Star break, but I think that it's going to be hard where they are right now to have a truly, I think one of the worst 3 records in the league is unlikely. There's a chance they get to 4 or 5 if they really commit to it, and some other teams maybe aren't as steadfast in their appreciation of losing for ping pong balls. But most likely the Blazers are going to be drafting in that like 5 through 8 range. I think it's probably a safe bet. Obviously, like the only thing that the lottery odds do is give you odds. They don't make your pick. And once you make the pick, then once you get the pick slot, that's not the player. There's a lot that goes into it. But what I want to focus on today is not guys at the very top of the draft, which me and you have discussed in the past, but some guys who are a little further down. I'll give you some names. You tell me what you like about them, what you don't like about them, and then we'll play a little bit of draft or pass. If the Blazers are on the clock, we'll call it, for fun, we'll call it 6. We'll say the Blazers are at 6 for our exercise here. If the Blazers are on the clock at 6, would they do it? Let's start with a man that I hope has a terrible Saturday afternoon. Duke wing Con Knipple. I hope that dude has a miserable Saturday, but he's a pretty good basketball player. What do you think about Con?
Yeah, it's funny. He's a guy that was really built as this elite 3-point shooter coming in and was kind of given that as his primary skill set. Like that was what most people focused on. That's what most people talked about with him. And he has been a good 3-point shooter. He has not been like 45%. I think he's at 37, 38, somewhere in there as a 3-point shooter, a high volume shooter, which for anybody who does kind of look at scouting or kind of look at the numbers and try to evaluate what matters. One of the things that I've learned recently is that overwhelmingly the volume of 3-point shots you take in college matters way more than your actual percentage. Con takes over 6 threes a game, so that's a fairly promising sign for him. He's about, like I said, 37%. But he's a player who, and we're not going to lie about it here. We know why he gets labeled unathletic, and we know why he gets labeled as not being a good defensive player. And in reality, if you watch Duke games, he actually is pretty good on that end. I don't think he's going to come into certainly not as a rookie. He's not going to come in the NBA and be a good defender. And even over time, he'll probably grade out as average at best. But he's far from bad on that end of the floor. He's not a bad athlete. He's a below the rim athlete, but he's got functional strength. He can get to the rim. He's a good decision maker. You can see that already as a freshman. He's very limited turnovers. He's not a super high assist guy, but that's not the role that he fills for Duke. And I think he's a guy who could kind of be a secondary creator, be a bit of a playmaker in the NBA over time. But mostly you like Con because of his 3-point shooting. And I think in the NBA with the spacing out there, he's somebody who could really help. And specifically with Portland, that's an area where somebody who's just a knockdown 3-point shooter at 6'7", I mean, that's something this team could really use. And if that's the skill he brings right away, you take that. And if you get the other stuff after that, that's gravy. But he's going to be able to provide that. I think you can tell that even with the percentage not jumping off the page in a major way. I really like Khan. I like what he brings to this Duke team. I like how he impacts winning, and I think he's a player that, especially with his age, could be a really nice piece in this draft class, kind of in that middle range, like you said.
Yeah, I think guys typically his size, like 6'6", 6'7", you can fake it on defense. Usually the guys who really get like exposed in the NBA are like smaller, 6'2", 6'3". It's like, yeah, you're not a very good defender and you're just never big enough. But guys like him can fake it. Like I kind of think the same way. This is like a bad comp because I think Dalton Connect is maybe more athletic than he is. But like Connect, who's like, it's like, he might not ever be a good defender in the league, but I'm pretty sure that he could be part of good defensive teams because he's just the right size. And the guy's just the right size. Just like you can get in the way and you can use just like your just general frame to be that level. I will say I watched Khan in the preseason during Duke's a couple of their pre-conference action, and I don't know that he made a shot in the little bit I watched. I think one of the games I watched he was like 1 of 7, right? Like I was just like, I thought he could shoot. Like I thought, like what is going on? But I was impressed, like you said, with the secondary playmaking stuff. He does run some pick and rolls. He does pass a little bit. Like he's not just a shooter. He's a guy with like more varied skills, which is why he's a lottery guy. So let's start here. Blazers are on the clock. Cue that NBA draft. Bing. Draft or pass. Concanipple at 6.
I'll say draft. I think there's a chance they'll have better options, and some of them who we will talk about here momentarily, but there are definitely worse options for Portland too, and I don't think that Blazers fans would be upset or should be upset drafting Khan considering the needs the team has at number 6. So I'll say draft.
Yeah, pass. Go Tar Heels. But the next name I want to ask you about is VJ Edgecombe. He was a guy who was hot, right? He was like this is maybe a guy who could sneak into the top 3 early, and I think he slipped. Where is he now, and what have you seen from the Baylor freshman?
Yeah, he's been absolute money lately offensively. A guy who he started his college career slow, and I think it's for a player who had so much momentum, and so much of the momentum for Edgecombe coming into the season was his maturity, was the fact that he'd already played in the Olympics. So of all the freshmen to have slow starts to their career, his was like, I think, one of the more surprising ones, which is why it almost more dramatically impacted people's perception of him of like, oh, this isn't a guy who was supposed to start slow. Like we're not as concerned about even like Flag, starting slow because he's of his age, or Bailey and Harper being on a bad team. Like maybe it's okay if they start slow, but Edgecombe, like kind of everybody expected he'd hit the ground running. Scott Drew's a great coach. They do great things with freshmen. And so for him starting slow was a bit surprising. And yet now, as they get into conference play, when they're playing, some of the tougher opponents that they're going to face all season, his offense has really come around, and more specifically, the 3-point shooting has been excellent. And that was a big hinge for him of like, is he going to be somebody who can contribute, who can space the floor, who can contribute outside of being a super high level athlete? He's not a great ball handler. The self creation is okay, but if he can't shoot threes, doesn't have the handle to be super elite in that area. Is he mostly just a great defender and a great transition offensive player? But now that we're seeing that 3-point shot come around, I mean, we're talking 6 of 8 in their game against BYU, their most recent game. He was 4 of 6 the game before that against Utah. Yes, BYU and Utah are not the best teams in the Big 12, but 4 of 6 and 6 of 8 in back-to-back games is incredible for him to be shooting like that. And 3 of 7 the game before that. Like he is a very, very good shooter the last couple of games. You want to see that continue. You want to see that stick. It's a few game sample when he started out kind of rough in that area is still a question for him, but I mean, he's got a better 3-point percentage than Con Knipple on the season at this point now with that hot streak lately. So if he's a 3-point shooter with the athleticism, with the defensive instincts, with just the size and frame that he has, he's a very, very, very high level player in this class. The maturity, the distribution skills, like there's a lot to his game. He's got to cut down the turnovers, but he's a 19-year-old freshman playing on a Baylor team that kind of threw together a roster last minute. So a lot of players are kind of trying to figure out their roles on this team. So I've been really impressed with what he's done lately to the point where, realistically, I'm not sure he'll be there at 6 at this point.
Yeah, I saw him in the Olympics. That was my first exposure to him, watching DeAndre Ayton in the Bahamas in the qualifiers. And I was like, yeah, that's a pro. I think I watched 3 of their games or parts of 3 of their games, 2 and some change. And it was like, Yeah, that's a pro. Just the athleticism and stuff. I did not realize as you were talking that he's shooting 39% from three on four and almost 5 attempts a game. Like, yeah, that's intriguing. Is he a 2 only? Like, what position is he in the pros?
Yeah, I think he's a 2. He plays bigger than his size, so he looks like he could be a 3. But I think in the NBA, I mean, 6'5" is what they list him as. We'll see what he measures, not in shoes. If he's 6'4", there's no way he's playing the 3. Even if he's got a ton of size and strength, he's just not tall enough, I think. So he's probably limited to a 2.
Yeah, and he's probably not point guardy yet in his right now. So it's like I would say that my drawback with him is maybe positional versatility. Is like, is he a 1? And obviously the Blazers have guards, which is why I want to ask you at 6, draft or pass?
Yeah, I still think you draft here, but he's not as obvious of a fit roster wise, just with Scoot and with Shaden and everything, because of that lack of positional versatility. But the talent is so undeniable. And now with the 3-point shooting, I mean, if we're thinking cons of draft, then Edgecombe's shooting a slightly higher percentage on a slightly less volume, but still a pretty good volume. So if he can space the floor, he's as much as we talked about Khan's defense, VJ is clearly a better defender, and he's going to contribute in that area. And the 3-and-D capability with Edgecombe is gives him a pretty high floor and a high ceiling. So I'd say draft here, even though the positional need it's a little bit questionable.
Yeah, I'm probably draft on talent. I don't have as good, we're 6 months from the NBA draft. I don't have as good a feel as I will when we get to June, but I would say in January I would lean draft because I think I'm intrigued with the talent. He averages over 2 steals a game and almost a block at 6'4", at 6'5", I'm into it. Okay, I got a couple other names. We'll talk about them in the second segment. Join us there, won't ya? First, I want to bring you this message from sponsor Intuit TurboTax. Taxes was waiting and wondering and worrying if you were going to get any money back, and then waiting, wondering, and worrying some more. Now Taxes is matching with a TurboTax expert who can do your taxes as soon as today. An expert who gives your taxes their undivided attention as they work on your return while you get real-time updates on their progress so you can focus on your day. An expert who will find you every deduction possible and file every form, every investment, everything with 100% accuracy, all so you can get the most money back guaranteed. No waiting, no wondering, no worries. Now this is Taxes. Get an expert now on TurboTax.com. Only available with TurboTax Live full service, real-time updates only in iOS mobile app. See guaranteed details at TurboTax.com/guarantees. All right, still chatting here with Andy Patton, the host of Locked On College Basketball and Locked On Zags right here on the Locked On Podcast Network. Go check it out wherever you are already listening to this. You're going to find Andy there too. Okay, Andy, I got a couple more names for you. Asa Newell at Georgia. What do you think?
Yeah, I've long been a big Asa Newell fan. I was a fan of him as a potential target for the Blazers before they even played a college basketball game this year. I thought he was a guy who, at that time, he was mostly showing up late lottery, mid-first, where, the expectation was that the Blazers would probably be picking higher than that. And now his draft stock is kind of more on par with where we think the Blazers are going to pick, to the point where a lot of mock drafts that come out now, that's a pretty common pick. And for good reason. I think the main question with Newell is simple. We're talking about a 6'11" guy. He's a great rim runner. He scores around the rim. He's got high level athleticism, dunks the basketball every time he gets it. A good defender, not a great defender, but somebody who, when he fills out a little bit more, he's just 19 years old, you can tell that there's still some growth potential there for him. I think he develops into a good defender. But the question for him is the 3-point shot. Because in high school, that he was billed as this is a 6'11" guy who's going to block shots and shoot threes. He's the unicorn, the Chet Holmgren 2.0, which they're just throwing at about everybody that they can at this point. And Newell, the frame is similar. The high school production was somewhat similar, but so far the NBA or the 3-point shot hasn't really been there. 27%. The volume's fairly mediocre, but we've seen it kind of come around at times. And I think that's the question. If you believe that Asa Newell can turn into a passable 3-point shooter, he doesn't need to be 40%. He does a high volume guy, but a guy that you cannot leave open, a guy that can pick and pop and hit that shot comfortably, then I think he's got really high value, because I do think that the physicality shows up with age. I do think that as the body matures, the shot blocking ability, the rebounding ability, we'll see it. And he's played in the SEC, and it is an absolute storm in the SEC every single night. You're playing really, really good teams, really talented bigs, physical players, and he has held his own for the most part in that range. So I really like Asa Newell. I think for a fit with Portland, he's excellent in that spot. I think that again, I liked him as a fit for the Blazers before the season started. The main thing that has slowed that a little bit is the development of Toumani Camara and just the role that he plays. They're not exactly the same player, but I think that it helps that Portland has a young player like that in the system. But Newell would be a really, really nice fit on this team.
Yeah, I'm intrigued by him. I've watched Carolina lose to 3 SEC teams this year, so I'm cool on it. I don't need to watch any more SEC basketball. It's fine with me. Because the Blazers have so few plus shooters on the roster, adding another guy who isn't a plus shooter is dicey, and not even with the positional stuff. Like, I think he can play behind Toumani and Denny to begin with, and then you kind of just say, hey, we'll figure it out. But like, you kind of want skill versatility. You want like that. You want like, okay, well, when we bring in this type of dude off the bench, we have this shooting, or we have like that skill versus, Toumani has improved as a shooter for sure, but he's still below average shooter. Denny is still a below average shooter, but he's been a lot better lately. But it's like, do you want to add another sort of that type of 4 to the mix type of thing? If they're at 9, I think it's pretty easy, but at 6, draft or pass.
Yeah, I'm kind of leaning pass as much as I like Asa Newell, because I think you're right. I think if he's there at like a 9, 11, something like that, absolutely. At 6, considering that you probably are going to have somebody like Nipple on the board, you might have VJ Edgecombe on the board, you might have some of the other names we're going to get to on the board. Like, I think you probably lean somebody else, just because, if you keep acquiring non-shooters and they don't, and you're just banking on them developing into shooters, if they don't, you're going to have Scoot's not going to be able to get to the rim because they're going to pack the entire paint on a team full of non-shooters. So Newell is a guy I really like, and I think could be a great fit in Portland if he develops correctly. But there is enough of a risk there that I would probably look for somebody a little bit safer or a little bit more in line with what Portland needs right now.
Yeah, I'm a pass too, I think. He's a name that's been on my sort of short list of like dudes I need to pay closer attention to, because I do think like athletic size is kind of what this team likes, like that the length and the athletes, that is really what they're all about. So I can see a world in which Asa Newell appeals to the Blazers a lot. That to me is a name that I think kind of fits who they have drafted. And they don't give a hoot about positions. They'll play Toumani at 2. They don't care. But it's just like, Scoot's a below average shooter. Shaedon Sharpe has not become a good shooter in the league. He's a bad one. And it's like, adding another one to the mix is a little dicey with me. Okay, I have a mildly controversial one just because of all of the names we just mentioned. The next one on my list is Jeremiah Fears from Oklahoma. A huge riser, a name that I did not know, and now everyone loves. What has Fears done to become the sort of the sweetheart of the 2025 lottery?
I like how you said controversial, because when you gave me the list of names, this is one of the few that I was not expecting to see on the list.
You didn't think that this was going to come up here. Yeah, but I want to talk about this is a process choice, right? Like, what do you think of Fears first? Then we'll get into the process.
Yeah, so Fears has really popped. And I saw him play a couple of games in the Battle for Atlantis back in early November, and he's like, I believe the youngest or the second youngest, I think the second youngest behind Cooper Flagg player in college basketball at the high major level. He is insanely young. He reclassified. And normally when you see guys reclassify to play up a level, they're, guys like Cooper Flagg who are at super high profile programs and obvious one and done, top 10 players in their class type players. And Fears wasn't really that. Oklahoma's not a bad program, but they're not a program that typically lands 5-star guys. And he wasn't billed as kind of being that level of player. And yet pretty much immediately he stepped into a huge role for Oklahoma, took over for this team. He's averaging 16 points. He's averaging over 4 4 assists. He's averaging 4 boards despite being a 6'4", 18-year-old guard in the SEC, which is just bananas. And the main thing about him that is the clear and obvious translatable skill for him is he's elite at getting downhill and getting to the free throw line. I mean, he has this skill that is so hard to teach, and especially for him to have it kind of organically at such a young age is, I mean, just looking at his most recent box scores, 7 of 7 from the line at Arkansas, 6 of 6 from the line against South Carolina, 5 of 8 from the line in the game before that. Like he gets downhill, he gets to the line, he converts to the stripe. He's shooting 83% on just about 6 attempts per game. But yeah, he's not a good 3-point shooter. He has not proven that skill yet. Maybe you bank on it showing up, but 27%, it's hard to know. Again, the youth probably gives you some optimism that that's something that can develop over time, but it's not there yet. The turnovers are super high too. I'm less concerned about the turnovers because he's so young, but the 4.3 assists is nice, but it looks a little worse when you see 3.6 turnovers per game. So he has the ball in his hands a ton. Oklahoma just literally lets him kind of go and do what he wants. That's not going to be the role he fills in the NBA. I think he's a project. I think he's a multi-year project. I think the upside is high, but I think that the floor is frankly lower than every other player that we have talked about at this point, just because the volatility of his profile.
Yeah, so I've seen him play one game. They played Arizona, and he had 26, 5, and 5. And my thought was like, wow, that's a pretty big game in college. But also, like, he took so many hard shots. Like he just gets himself downhill and takes some chaotic attempts at the rim, which is how you draw fouls and how you do all those things. He'll be 18 on draft night. He doesn't turn 19 until October. So like he'll be 18 when camp opens. Like he is young. I am intrigued by him just because of the way his stock has risen. But this is the process thing. Scoot Henderson is significantly better in year 2 than he was in year 1. There's no doubt about that. But is Scoot Henderson, do the Blazers, I guess, and this is like more of a question for them than for us, but we can answer it here, is like, do they view him as a building block still, or could they be swayed and say, if we see a guard that's so damn good, we have to go for it? I think if it's Dylan Harper, that's another thing, right? Like that's like, oh, this might be an all NBA guard. But when you drop a little bit further down, say they're at 6, right? And Fears is there and they love him. Draft or pass, and kind of in the light of what it would mean for Scoot Henderson, what do you do with it?
Yeah, I think I'm probably pass, but like I'm glad you said the Dylan Harper thing, because if the Blazers get the 2nd overall pick, Dylan Harper will be there, obviously, unless the first team colossally screws up. You take Dylan Harper. You take Dylan Harper because he's got legitimate All-NBA potential. You do that, you figure the rest out. That's totally fine. I'm not sure there's another point guard in this class that you do that with. And Fears is probably the closest one. And if he just dominates at camp and looks dominates at the combine and looks amazing, and his testing is great, and the athletic testing is there, and he's and all that stuff, and the Blazers just love him, then yeah, maybe you make it work and you figure it out. But he is a pure point guard. I mean, he's not playing off the ball. He needs the ball in his hands to score. So you are, it's like when you take Scoot, when you have Dame, it's like these guys cannot play together. You know that you're going to have to make a move here. And this would be a similar situation for the Blazers of like, we're either handing the keys to Fears or dumping him after a while. And it's a risky proposition. I think the lack of 3-point shooting does scare me enough. I think it's easy to say, well, that'll come around. But if it doesn't, you're kind of stuck with this kid who's got a lot of skill, but, is somewhat limited in his overall ceiling. So I like the profile. I like the talent. I like the player. I don't love him as a pick for the Blazers unless they really sour on Scoot, which the way he's been playing lately probably won't happen. But we'll see.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I think that's kind of where I land too. And I'm glad you said this, like beyond Dylan Harper, there isn't a point guard that would change that. I think there is a level where you always just draft talent over fit. I think there's a level where it's just like, that dude is too good to not put on our team. But then you get a little bit further down, particularly when you are in these sort of middle lottery spots where you have to kind of think about how they fit into the plan and whether they work. And I think where you really sold me here is the single position, then with the lack of positional versatility. If you only can play one spot, you're just not going to be able to play 2 point guards in the league and put out a particularly good defensive group. See the last decade of Blazer basketball. If you just want to check out the last decade of Blazer basketball, you can see if that checks out. Okay, I got one more name, and I want to ask you a couple more questions to close the show about guys you like with the Blazers hypothetical lottery spot. Join us in the third segment, won't you? First, I want to tell you about Gametime, the place to buy tickets to live events so you can create unforgettable experiences. Maybe you're feeling the flow. The Blazers have won 5 of 6, and they play a couple more home games coming up. You can go to the Orlando Magic game and sit downstairs right now using the Gametime app for under $40, $38 for a pair of tickets downstairs. That's a pretty dang good deal, and that's what Gametime does. They find you dang good deals. Gametime has a new feature called Gametime Picks that makes getting tickets for events even easier. It filters out all the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats, so you don't have to waste your time searching through thousands of tickets. Say you can't make it on Thursday when the Blazers host the Magic this evening as you're listening to the show. Well, on Saturday they play the Suns, and you can get in the building and sit upstairs for $8 on Gametime. Plus, they'll play the Suns again on Monday. You can hit that back up, and you can get in the arena right now for $7 and sit upstairs. All available on Gametime. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and use that redemption code LOCKEDONNBA. That's LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off. Download Gametime today. Last-minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. Still a pass first point guard. Still Mike Richmond. Still chatting here with Andy Patton of Locked On College Basketball and Locked On Zags. Okay, the last one I got for you, one of my faves, Kasparas Jakucionis from Illinois. I've watched 3 full games, but which is a lot for me for any individual in college that doesn't play for a very bad basketball team based in Chapel Hill, North Carolina. Normal bad, but a bad one. They're probably going to miss the NCAA tournament. But one of them I watched on mute at the bar. That one doesn't really count. So I've watched 2 full games of them, but it was the one on mute and the bar went to overtime. It was fun to watch. We just didn't have sound. So with Jakucionis, sell me on him. What do you like about him? What could he bring to the NBA?
Yeah, the thing about Jakucionis is that he is the size for his position is super valuable. And you're talking about, like we talked about Fears being a one position guy. We talked about Edgecombe probably being a one position guy. That's not the case here. He's a guy who he can play the 1, he can play the 2. And I think he gets kind of unfairly labeled as being an off-ball guard and not getting enough credit for being his ability to play on the ball. I was, when I was kind of researching some of the guys we were talking about here, Bleacher Report comped him to Chauncey Billups, which is humorous for lots of reasons, obviously. But I don't know if I love that comp for some parts of it, but I can also see it a little bit. And I think it's fair to acknowledge, like, this, he's a point guard. Like, he's a 6'6", 200-pound, 18-year-old point guard. He's got 3-level scoring. He can get to the rim. He's shown a ability to knock down the open shot fairly consistently. I think one of the more notable things that I noticed about him was when he was hurt, he missed like 2 or 3 games, maybe in like a 2-week span for Illinois. They were noticeably significantly worse. And for a freshman player to make that kind of impact on a team where they look flat out bad without him on the floor. And I think that is, for a team that's well coached, for a team that has been historically very good the last few years, to be so reliant on a player like him is really telling. And in a system that, Illinois has been in the top 5 in offensive efficiency at KenPom for the last 10 years, or pretty much as long as Coach Underwood's been there. So this is a consistently good offensive team that got markedly better when he was on the floor. So I like the offensive ability. I think the defense is something that some people will maybe worry about a little bit. I think that, again, the positional size makes me a little less concerned about that. I think if you're drafting him, you're hedging your bet a little bit. Like, if you draft Jeremiah Fears, you are putting yourself in a position where you got to make a call on Scoot, and you got to make a call on Scoot soon. If you draft KJ, you're not doing that as much. You can play him at the 2, you can play him off ball. He can play alongside Scoot because he can space the floor, because he can be a secondary creator type thing. And if you end up wanting to move on from Scoot, you decide he's not the guy. You can slide him over the 1, slide KJ over the 1, and play shade in the 2 and you're good, because he can kind of fill both those roles somewhat seamlessly. And I think that above anything else makes him a really desirable player in this range for a lot of different teams who can kind of utilize that positional versatility. Again, the defense, I think it'll come around. Maybe it will never be great. And certainly that's an issue that Blazers fans don't want to hear, having a backcourt with multiple bad defenders. Cause like you said, you just watched the last 10 years, but at least he's not a 6'3" bad defender, like we talked about with some of the other players.
Yeah, I love the creativity as a passer at his size. Like he's not whatever Pete Maravich, but he's not reinventing the way to pass the ball, but he's a dude who finds his teammates off the bounce. He's like I really like him in the games that I've watched. He's like a big point guardy, and I love big point guards. I'm really intrigued by him. I kind of think he'll get the Luka role in the NBA, where on offense he mostly plays guard, and on defense he's never guarded a point guard in his damn life. It's like so it's like, what position does he play? Well, it's like he certainly isn't a point guard on the other end. Like I've never seen Luka guard a point guard for a single minute after like his first NBA season. And I bet Jaksionis would be similar, where it's just like, yeah, he has the ball in his hands a bunch, but then when you go the other way, they stick him on another 6'6" dude and like hope that he can hold his, hope that he's strong enough to hold his own. I'm intrigued by him because it's a lot of, I'm thinking about him with Denny Avdia and him with Scoot Henderson, and maybe like having a lot of guys who can handle and pass. I'm big on a bunch of dudes who can make plays off the bounce for their teammates, not just for themselves. I think there's real value. I think one of the things that makes Oklahoma City really good is they have a bunch of dudes drive, kick, swing. So it all starts with SGA, but they have like an amazing number of players. Isaiah Joe can somehow get into the paint and pass. Aaron Wiggins can somehow get into the paint and pass. Obviously, J-Dub and Chet can both do those things. It's like they have all these guys who can make plays. Isaiah Hartenstein is a really good passer for his size. And I think having more players on the court who are natural and smart playmakers is really valuable in the modern NBA. He's, for me, I won't even ask you first. I'm a draft at 6 right now. He's one of my favorite guys in the whole draft. Where are you, draft or pass with Jaksionis?
Yeah, six is a great spot for him. I think you can make an argument for him at as high as 4. Realistically, depending on the team, like if Portland's at 4 and the 3 that go are who's expected to go, Flag, Bailey, Harper, or Flag, Harper, Bailey, more likely. I think I'm taking him 4. Like it's him or Edgecombe maybe in that mix too. But I think he's a great fit for Portland. I think he's a great fit for a lot of teams. I think he has as high of a floor as an 18-year-old can have coming into the league, just because of all the factors we've kind of already talked about with him. And I think a fit alongside Denny and everybody else who can kind of, give you multiple different creators, multiple different driving kick guys would be really fantastic. I would love him in Portland.
We're in. I was closing with a banger. Okay. So you said when you got the list and it said Jeremiah Fears, you're like, okay, what the hell, Mike? Who were the other names that were on your list that could have been in the range? Like who are some guys you thought might be there? Yeah,
I think Liam McNeely was a name I was kind of thinking we might hear.
He's the next guy on my list. I just didn't include him. Okay.
Yeah, no, that I mean, he obviously hurt right now, so we don't have any new data on him for a while. Although, again, if we're going to use KJ being hurt and Illinois being worse, UConn's been absolutely terrible without Liam McNeely, which is probably not nothing. I was very impressed when he played Gonzaga. I was very irritated during that game, and then impressed after I got over it emotionally. But he's a really talented player, and not just a pure 3-point shooter too. He's got a lot of skill in his game, and I think I think he's probably going to slip 9-10 range. I think he's a little out of that 6 range, but if Portland falls, if they're in that range, he's a pretty quality player to get right there.
Yeah, the shooting and the size. That's all. That's intriguing with McNeely. Like he's big, he's young, and he can shoot. Like that seems like a good NBA player. Of the centers, are you like? I think me and you talked off mic about how neither of us are really think that it makes sense for the centers, but like Colin Malawak at Duke has been. Like he looks like he's going to be a pretty good pro. It pains me to say that Duke is loaded with pros again. And Carolina hasn't had an all-star since, I'm not even going to say the year, but it's been a while, guys. But like Derek Queen or Colin Malawak, like, are they good enough that you would be intrigued? Obviously not at 6, but if the Blazers are further down the lottery, are you anti-center for this team?
Yeah, I kind of am. Honestly, I'm not super thrilled with the center class. Malawak's the best name. He's huge. He's just so freaking big,
Very
and
big.
he moves well for his size. And you honestly don't really need to know anything else about him. Like those are the two things that are incredibly important with him. I like some of the more under the radar centers. Like if Portland were to either trade into the second round or some guys who fell undrafted, like Ryan Kalkbrenner, who's been in college for 15 years, but he's very, very good at what he does from Creighton. Maxime Reynaud, who's at Stanford, he's probably not going to fall out of the draft. He might even sneak in the first round. But like, there's some guys that I like, but Queen, fine. He's a good player. I don't love him in Portland. Thomas Sorber at Georgetown, I like him. Don't love the fit in Portland either. Like, there's some decent centers in this class, but nobody that certainly not with Klingon being the Blazers' most recent first round pick. I don't think that they need to look at this center class.
Klingon looks pretty good. This is I would say the only position that I think they can't draft in the lottery is center. Point guard would be weird if it wasn't Dylan Harper, but I think you're drafting wings because it's a league built on the wings, and it's a team that has sort of a type of player that they like, with a certain size and athleticism, defensive grit. VJ Edgecombe is a very Blazers-y player. I wouldn't draft a center. I think you have to be really confident in your, have strong convictions at point guard. But yeah, I think you're looking at the 2, 3s, and 4s in this draft. Andy, thanks so much for joining the program. It is always a treat to chat with you and pick your brain because, like I said, you are spending a lot of time thinking, watching, and talking about college basketball. So I really appreciate it.
Yeah, Mike, thanks for having me on. Always happy to do it. I'm sure we'll have some more conversations as the season goes on.
Absolutely. Go check out Locked On College Basketball. It is available. However you're listening to this, Locked On College Basketball is available right there. And if you are a Zags fan, which many of you are, because I saw you all at Old Gold before you went to UP last weekend, you were all there. Go listen to Locked On Zags because Andy does a great job. And then come back tomorrow. The Blazers play the Orlando Magic, and I will have you covered from everything that happens in that game. It's what we do 5 days a week, wherever you get podcasts and also on YouTube. I appreciate you listening. I'll talk to you soon.